Okay, here we are on Wednesday, January 12th. And this is the first of 4 sessions in which I want to talk about my journey from what I'm calling too much reactivity to mostly allowing. I have plenty of moments where there's still reactivity instead of allowing. However, the balance has definitely shifted. In my life, I have had many instances of reactivity, and some of you have known me long enough and been present enough in my life to have been there when I've had a moment of reactivity. And even though I'm pretty functional most of the time, from time to time, I've had blow-ups. And my blow-ups look like frustration, anger, losing my temper, and sometimes they even take on some physical dimensions. I've been known to throw a few things, not at people, but there are a lot of damaged walls around. And the typical circumstances in which I am triggered is when I feel stress in the sense of I'm overwhelmed by the task at hand and I don't know what to do. I don't feel as if I have the resources to do it. When I'm in a situation where I'm feeling pretty frustrated, I keep trying to do something, it's not working. And in those situations, what I usually have done over the years is that when it first occurs is to tamp it down, is to say, oh, you can get yourself back in control here, and not deal with what's actually happening. Tamp it down, tamp it down, tamp it down, and then it explodes and becomes a blow up. I suspect I'm probably not the only person here who's had that experience in a lifetime, but who knows? So I want to share with you a very specific example of this. Many years ago, this was probably 35 years ago, when I was working in a bank, I was part of a team of people who were working on trying to improve financial information systems. And part of the people in the room were from the controller's area, and they were in charge of the basic accounting that was going on in the organization. And part of the people were from the information technology area. And I was representing an interest in internal profitability measurement systems. And even though I understood that the controllers people and the IT people were afraid that what I wanted to do was going to screw up their basic systems, and it could have, I was still pushing hard for what I believed we needed. And in one meeting, we decided that we would do ABC before the next meeting. And there was a woman in the group who was in the IT area. She was a programmer, but she was assigned to the general ledger system. So she had the expertise in both areas. And she was given the assignment to go off and do these 3 or 4 tasks. So when we met again a month later, when all of this was supposed to be completed, it didn't get mentioned, and finally I raised the question. And somebody turned to this woman and said, so what's your report? And she said, well, nothing has been done on this. And she didn't have any particular reason why. And after tamping down my frustration with the accountants and the techies that I had been wrestling with for some time, it blew up. And I was completely in reactive mode, and I unleashed a stream of verbal assault on this woman that no way did she deserve. And in the middle of it, I was having that sense of, this is righteous indignation and it feels pretty damn good. I had essentially no awareness of how inappropriate my behavior was, of how unpleasant it was for the other people in the room, let alone how awful it was for this person at whom it was being directed. And even when somebody said something to me later and said, you know, you were pretty hard on her, you ought to apologize. Even then, I barely recognized what was going on. I was so caught up in taking it personally and being in this place of not feeling heard, which is one of my conditions from childhood, of being in those situations when I was young, where I just couldn't, where I was being accused of doing something that I didn't think I'd done, or I thought I'd been this bad and the attack was this big. And I couldn't feel heard. And that's still a triggering point for me today, although it's much less volatile. I'm much less likely to be triggered by that, which is part of the allowing process. So the combination of not feeling heard, taking it personally, and this buildup of emotion led to this unfortunate situation. By 2010, I had committed myself to mindfulness practice. And I was participating in a program called A Year of Living Mindfully, led by Jonathan Faust, who's one of Kay's and my favorite teachers. And the program was up in Washington, D.C., and I was going up there 2 or 3 times a month. And part of the program was meeting regularly in a small spiritual practice group that consisted of 8 of us. In this particular circumstances, it was 7 women and me, which had its own dimensions to it. In a KM group, you meditate for about 20 minutes. Then people check in. They say, this is what's going on in my life at the moment, for a few minutes, few sentences each. And then the third part is the particular leader for that evening either reads something or has sent something out in advance, and you talk about it. Over a period of months, it got to the place where there were 2 people in this group who couldn't stop talking during the check-in, even though they'd been given a lot of negative feedback about it. Essentially, their attitude was, this is my time, to hell with the rest of you. And so, in my mind, they weren't following the rules. They weren't being fair to other people. And God knows they weren't being mindful. So I was having some reactivity to it. And I tried at one time to facilitate a conversation among all of us about how we might set some guidelines and find a way around this. And these 2 women said, in essence, I know you're just trying to manipulate me here, and I'm not paying any attention. To hell with you. Which was pretty unpleasant. But I was mostly in tamping down mode. I didn't react. So a few weeks later, I was driving up to another one of these sessions. And I decided as I was driving along that I would practice rain, that I would put myself back in that situation and be aware of what was going on, allow it to happen, allow this unpleasant experience of listening to first one and then the other of 2 people talk and talk and talk. about themselves. And I began to locate where in my body I could feel this unpleasantness, this difficulty. And I directed my attention there. I stopped replaying in my head the experience of one or the other of them talking or one or the other of them resisting the group. And I just concentrated on what was going on in my body. And suddenly I felt this shaking in my body, which was equivalent to seeing an animal shake off a difficult experience. We have this 16-month-old dog, and when we're out walking, if something happens that gets her attention and she's upset about it, within about 20 seconds, she just shakes all over and then moves on. And that was the experience that I had. So in that moment, I had my first experience, really, of allowing this situation, which was so unpleasant, to simply be what it was, recognizing I had no control whatsoever over the behavior of these two people. However much I thought their behavior was inappropriate, I had no control over it, and I had to allow it, accept it, let it be what it was. That was the fork in the road for me on my journey of shifting from too much reactivity to allowing. So about 3 or 4 years later, I was in the airport in Dallas getting ready to fly back to Richmond. And I went to the counter, and the ticket agent said, you're flying from here to Charlotte and then to Richmond. And this flight that you're on is going to be late, and you're going to miss your flight in Charlotte. And it was right after U.S. Airways and American had announced their merger. They weren't officially together yet, but they'd announced it. And so he put me on a direct flight from Dallas to Richmond. And it would have gotten me in about the same time, and I didn't have to worry about missing the flight. So he cranked up all the paperwork, gave it to me, and I had to change terminals. And I was about halfway, 2/3 of the way of changing terminals. And I thought, I don't think I feel that paperwork in my back pocket. And I stopped and checked, and I realized that somehow I'd lost the paperwork. And I stood there and thought to myself, well, what are your options here? You can either go directly on to the American desk and hope that the electronic record is there and they can redo the paperwork for you. Or you can go back to the desk where you got the paperwork in the first place and get it replaced. I chose that option. 24 hours later, it occurred to me that in that moment, I had not been triggered. In that moment of realizing I didn't have the paperwork, I just thought, what are my options? Historically, I would have said to myself, and Rob, you will really connect with this, you dummy Davidson, how could you have done something so stupid as to put that paperwork in your pocket where you could lose it? Didn't even occur to me until 24 hours that I might have in the past said that. That's this process of shifting from being triggered to allowing, of not taking things so personally so much of the time. So let's do a little practice around this. So taking a moment to settle in, probably a good time to take a couple of deep breaths deep in breaths and long, slow out breaths. Allowing all of this extra energy that goes with cognitive processing we've been doing to just flow away. And settling in just a little bit more. And gently directing your attention to your breathing. Noticing only the natural flow of your breathing. Noticing whether you're making your breathing especially prominent or noticeable. And just allowing your breathing to go to its natural place, to its natural flow. And however subtle the way your breath shows up in your body may be, taking your attention there. Allowing yourself to embody the experience of breathing, to fully embody the experience. Noticing any thoughts that are arising, that are capturing your attention, and allowing those thoughts to be present. Allowing and letting go of the thoughts. Perhaps recognizing, even if it's only for just a fraction of a second, the experience of allowing. Noticing how that feels. So let's take a few moments to reflect on the following question in our small groups. And I'd like you to particularly think about the examples that I gave of the situation where I was taking things personally that had to do with some conditioning in my life. Conditioning around not feeling heard, conditioning around having a low appetite for breaking the rules, for things getting disorderly, maybe even a bit chaotic. And recalling in an example that you share with people, perhaps a time when you were triggered, when you realized you were really taking it personally about something that has a long history with you.